So today's the day that Colonel Senders becomes even more awesome because we're gonna give it long travel suspension, widen the A-arms, and most importantly, put on these beefy, knobby tires so we have real traction and better handling. The steering on this thing has always been absolutely terrible. It has a ridiculously wide scrub radius. The scrub radius is the distance between the point where this steering pivot meets the ground and the center of your tire. But you want to set a scrub radius that's essentially fairly close to zero. This isn't even close to that. So part of that problem is these spacers, which we'll be able to do away with the new wheels and tires. These have 3 inches of offset from this surface to this surface. These have 5. So that gets the center of the tire much closer to this pivot point. And the easiest way to imagine why that's a problem is just, if you try to grab this part of the steering here and turn it, it takes a fair bit of effort. But if you would imagine putting a lever way out here, it'd be way easier to turn, just like putting a larger wrench on a bolt. Well, that's essentially what happens when you have a huge scrub radius, is that the tire now has drastically more leverage over your steering system. That also means it'd be less stable because it's narrower, which is why we're going for extended A-arms as well. Basically, I'm just gonna replicate this A-arm, but make it 3 inches longer. So I've got this spot here that's 3 inches farther out, but the shock mount and the sway bar mount will stay in the same place relative to these ends.
This video is sponsored by Cove. We love this split speaker. We've been using it in the garage for over a year and it gets crazy loud. And this is my favorite part right here. You basically get 2 for the price of 1. Surround sound in the garage, 1 upstairs, 1 downstairs. The range is awesome. The speaker can normally run for up to 7 hours and it's a great Father's Day present. So head on over to coveaudio.com/GP73 to get 67% off this awesome speaker. That's coveaudio.com/GP73. GP73 at checkout will get you a huge discount, but for now, let's get back to building.
Well, that's one rear lower A-arm more or less done. I still have a little bit of beefing up to do of these brackets, but I think that's sturdy. I went for overkill because, well, many reasons. 1, we want it to be beefy. 2, it's 3 inches longer, so there's more leverage on everything. And also, it's smaller, thinner wall tubing than the original was, so it needs to be beefier in other ways. And then build another one, and then another one, and another one, and another one, and another one. Got 8 of these things to build. It's gonna take a minute. No, but I started with the back ones because the lower rears, because they're the most complicated. Upper rear control arm took drastically less time to rebuild. I basically just cut out the middle bits and replaced them with longer ones, or these two arms. So I reused the end here and both of the pivots, of course. It was around 7 inches of travel before, maybe 7.5, something like that. Now it's 10. So we gained like I don't know, 40% more travel or something like that. It's a lot. I took all the preload out of the shock. And it still comes up quite a bit more. Operation Colonel Sender's long travel is continuing. Obviously, I got the one side of the rear done, and so now I'm mirror image copying it for the other side, which will go a lot faster because I already know exactly what I'm doing, and I already have all these brackets and stuff marked out on this sheet of 11 gauge steel here. So yeah, finish this one today, do the upper, then the rear will be done, aside from paint. And then the fronts, which will also be a lot easier because they're all straight lines. I mean, there's plenty of bracketry and reinforcement needed for the shock, but there's no big hoopy loopy things like this. Before I start in on the front control arms, I'm gonna go ahead and sandblast and paint the rears so that they have some time to dry and, you know, look nice and pretty. Got the rears all done and painted. Now it's time to do the fronts. This is the front upper, and it's the more complicated of them, so I'm gonna start with that. Here we've got the original front upper A-arm, you know, pretty basic. Here we've got the new front upper A-arm, which is super duper overkill beef in comparison. Also obviously 3 inches longer because that's the whole point of this endeavor, and it's definitely way stronger than necessary. See what happens with the other side because it has the engine case might be in the way, but on this side we now have 12 inches of potential travel here. So we had this rubber bump stop in there before, and also before the tires would hit the fenders, so that was essentially the bump stops. Well, now the tires are outside of the fender, and with the longer A-arms and these beefy shocks, we've got from there all the way down to there. Basically, the final step to long travel is longer axles. I couldn't find any for sale, so we're gonna make them longer. So the plan here is just cut it in half and then make a sleeve that covers the whole thing for maximum strength. You know, the sleeve will be 3 inches longer than what's here, and then it'll, you know, weld it back together and hope for the best. got my extension sleeve done. You can see I've got little holes drilled in it so I can weld directly to the shaft through those. And obviously right now I'm getting it nice and hot so that the expands a little bit, and then the axle should just slip right in there with minimal persuasion. I was supposed to go in there, and it's still got an inch to go. Morning workout. Well, that's axle number 1 extended and welded and ready to go back in. We've got the new control arm here on the bottom already because I was testing some other stuff. But yeah, time to see if it all works together the way it should. Well, that's this side assembled aside from the spring and of course the tire, but there's our 10 inches of travel. I have a plan for the springs because these are the springs that were on here. These shocks are out of a Yamaha RX-1 snowmobile, and with the previous amount of travel, these springs were too soft. We had the preload absolutely maxed out, and it was still on the soft side. That was good, but like barely hard enough. So what I have here is one of the original shocks from a Kawasaki Brute Force 750 that we stole this suspension stuff from. And obviously the shock is terrible in comparison, so we're not gonna use the shock, but I cut one apart and pulled the spring off, and it is quite a bit longer, so more preload adjustment, and it's also a slightly stiffer spring rate. So with our added travel and leverage, that should be just about perfect. So just gotta clean it up, paint it orange, and then slap it on there. So, exciting times. The front axles took way less time to extend because I happened to have a piece of relatively thick wall tubing that fit it perfectly. So I just cut them and then slid them into this and, did the four little weld spots and then welded the ends. What that means is the center 3 inches is just hollow, so it's not as strong, but it's the front, which doesn't take as much abuse as the back because it's not always being driven. It should be plenty strong. Time to put it back together and find out. I'm rigging up my specialized ghetto spring compressors here. We have real spring compressors, but first of all, they're made for much larger springs. And second of all, they'd scratch all the shiny orange paint off the springs. So, what I've got here is 2 chunks of cheap nylon rope. So you stick your straight piece of whatever, in this case a punch, in there. You twist it around, and Try not to scratch the paint off of everything. Bada bing, bada boom. And look at that. Hardly any damage to the paint on the shocks. I'd say that's a win-win.
Time to see if it was all worth it, huh?
Oh yeah, it was worth it. Even already, I haven't even driven it. I know it's worth it. But yeah, this is the moment of truth.
Jump that huge for the first one shows a lot of confidence. That was awesome. It must feel pretty good.
Holy cow. Wow. Yeah, it's not even related to the sim machine it was. You know how the steering was always like barely manageable?
Yeah.
Now, like, I keep thinking something's broken. It's so easy to steer, you can't even tell you're trying. Like, it feels like you're not moving anything. Like, I hit a big root and a stump, and I was trying to feel it in the steering wheel, and I couldn't. And just steering at any speed. I haven't tried four-wheel drive yet. That was all two-wheel drive. But also the traction increase is big. And the suspension, you that one jump, I bottomed out and dug frame into the landing. It has so much travel. I saw
that was
dirt.
Insane, and that was like your second jump too.
Yeah.
So it must feel pretty confident.
Oh, it's so good. And I mean the rear is stiffer than I would like. As I suspected, the rear's on the stiff side. And you can feel how much travel it has. Like when you get on the brakes or even just let off, you can just feel it dive to the front or like lean to the rear when you get on the throttle. Man, it's a totally different machine. Did you see the first time I came around, I just mobbed off of this and landed like down here on the flat?
Yeah.
No problem. I think the front needs to be a tad stiffer on the suspension and the rear needs to be softer. So we're gonna have to figure out something other than these springs. Like, I'm glad that it sucked so bad to begin with, because that meant we put the power steering in, which means that now it's just buttery smooth. Well, that was the most fun 10 minutes of riding in this thing I've ever had. And now it's over because one of my axle extensions, surprise, surprise, sheared in half. So that needs to be beefed up. But once we beef up that, we're gonna do another full send video because it's so much better than it ever was before. It's a whole new beast. And for that, it deserves a better place for full sending. So we're gonna go to a very exciting place that's like actually a professional off-road racetrack and, you know, all the good stuff. Hill climbs, rock gardens, jumps. Yeah, so that's gonna be epic as soon as we get a stronger solution for these axles.